America's working class has been cheated. That is an assertion.
Open border coordinate.
No, that's a Koch brothers proposal.
Then the Democrats jumped right on board with the corporatists. They got in bed with Wall Street, military-industrial complex, the fossil fuels, Silicon Valley. And now look what happened to the country. We have the biggest income disparity since the Gilded Age. Bigger than that. There's more.
Expanded trade has thrown the working class into much more competition than they experienced before trade with lower wage countries took off.
Can say is that as a country, we have to make a different set of choices because the choices we've made have hurt working people.
Congressman, because I wouldn't know what to tell you to write. I don't know what to do about the depression and the inflation and the Russians and the crime in the street. All I know is that first, you've got to get mad. You've got to say, I'm a human being. God damn it. My life has value.
Hello, and welcome to the Institute for Sound Public Policy podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Lynn, and I am joined by Jayant Bhandari. And what's great about having Jayant on tonight, he is going to be the first guest on the newly rebranded Institute for Sound Public Policy podcast and website. So welcome, Jayant.
Thanks for having me on, Kevin, and thanks for the honor of having me as your first guest.
Well, this is great. So what I want to do, Jayant, is first start off with telling our audience a little bit about you, and then jump into what we really want to talk about, which is some recent headlines regarding caste-based discrimination here in the United States, which is something of a novel phenomenon. Okay, so it's great to have you here, Jayant, because you are, I think, really qualified to talk about this because you're a writer on politics, economics, society, cultural issues. You write for the likes of the Liberty Magazine, the Mises Institute here in the United States, Canada, and India. You collaborate with Doug Casey on Casey Research and his Acting Man and International Man, all podcasts that I watch. Your articles are picked up in Zero Hedge, Lou Rockwell, Fraser Institute, Les Québécois, Libra, Malden Economics. You're a commodities, precious metal person, so you write for those journals like Northern Miner, Mining Journal, Mining Markets, and others. And you're also a contributing editor to Liberty Magazine, and more so. Every year, Jayant, you've run a really interesting seminar in Vancouver, British Columbia called Capitalism and Morality. So without any further ado, Jayant, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me on, Kevin, and thanks for having me as the first guest on your podcast.
You'll be a little lonely up on the new YouTube page and new Twitter feed, but you'll have a lot of company very soon, I am sure. Well, great. The reason, as we discussed, why I'd love to chat with you tonight is a bill just passed the Assembly in the legislature in California on class-based discrimination. And also this year, there was a lawsuit by employees at Cisco over what they felt was caste-based discrimination by their supervisors. And even though the state opted not to pursue it, they're actually pursuing their own lawsuit. So I thought maybe we'd start things off with Jayant with first kind of orienting our audience as to what caste is, and then we can get into how this phenomena seems to be following these waves of Indian migrations around the world.
So Kevin, let's go back in history a bit and let me very summarize the background here. When Europeans, particularly the British, when they arrived in India, they saw a society, they experienced a society that was barbaric and savage. British being systems guys, industrial revolution was about to start in the UK. Because they were systems guys, they were trying to create a structure around the arbitrariness, chaos, savagery, and barbarism of India. And that was actually a mistake, because by creating a system around what was fundamentally chaotic was going to convey a subliminally a wrong message to the future generation. Now, these people, Indians, had no concept of their own history. They kept not much written record of their own history. Indian history was discovered by the British. Indian religious scriptures were lost. It was the British who discovered those and translated those. Now, with that
so
background,
the Vedas and the texts that we have here, we are exposed to in the West, are really the result of the British excavating these?
yes, and except for one Indian, I know of no Indian who has ever read any of those texts. So when Indians talk or glorify about the romantic background they have in terms of spiritual texts, they are fooling you because they have never read any of those themselves. But now understand this thing, that with this thing, what they wanted, the British wanted to do was to create a systems and underpinning a structure to convey to other people what they saw in India. But they made, as I said, a huge mistake that they tried to create a system around chaos. So they picked out books, again, books that they themselves found and translated, which helped them give some kind of a structure to what they saw. And then they went ahead with defining the caste system into 4 or 5 subgroups. Now, the reality is that the ground reality even today is very different from those 4 or 5 caste system groupings. India has anything, depending on who you ask, between 3,000 to 30,000 castes and subcastes. And if you ask me, I would tell you that there are 1.4 billion castes in India, because every interaction with an Indian is setting in place a pecking order, which means that every interaction with an Indian leads to a conversation in which both of them are trying to judge who is going to be superior in the interaction and who is going to be inferior. So the caste system is a person-to-person caste system, and that's why I say there are 1.4 billion castes in the country. And that is why, Kevin, just to conclude this thing, no person with any sanity wants to smile at other people in India or help other people in India, because if you do that, you are immediately seen as inferior and belonging to the servant class, because only servants are supposed to help you.
Interesting. You made me think of a conversation I literally had 2 days ago with one of our activists in Texas, in Dallas, Fort Worth area. And he was looking out his window. He lives in a large apartment complex, and most of the people there are Indians, and he thinks that most are families where someone's there on an H-1B visa. And it was taco night at the rec center, and he watched the woman who was the manager. She had all these plates of tacos in her hand, and she had some bags, and she was making her way to the door, and there was a couple who were there of Indian descent, and they smiled at her and everything, but they didn't get the door. Like he said, he's watching from his window, and she's like nudging the door open, kicking open with her leg, and they couldn't be bothered to help. And I thought that is so 180 degrees from the typical response of a Texan who would see that transpire. Very interesting. And I could see where this is way beyond, because as men, I have found that if I go to a reception and I'm there, let's say a networking function, we're all kind of searching for alpha, and who's the leader, who's the guy, and usually someone will pop out the Rolex on their wrist, and he's the one that's running a certain company. And as soon as we know that, I think subconsciously we all kind of fall behind, and we're ready to go out on the hunt now. But this is much deeper than that. This is every interaction, you're saying, is like this.
Every single interaction, and I completely agree with you. There's a class system everywhere on the planet, but the degree of caste and class system that exists in India is way out of proportion to what you see in the West. In the West, everyone tries to be equal to the other person. In India, everyone makes sure he looks different from other person. It's a very atomized society, and all social interactions are about setting your place in the pecking order.
Interesting. One of the things I wanted to talk to you about tonight was what happened at Cisco, where I'd mentioned that you have, some employees who were of Indian descent felt that they were being discriminated by other Indian managers there. And a while back, I was speaking with a manager at a tech company, and he, an American guy, and we were talking about the H-1B program at his company. Because I said, well, he said, Kev, understand, we pay our H-1Bs who are here in the US the same as anyone else. They have all the same, they make the same money, the same benefits. But the problem we're having is this tribalism that's building up where, and the way he laid it out, and I'd love to get your thoughts on this, because I think it tracks with what you just said. He said, like, they have a farm team, they have an outpost in India, a company in India, an operation there. And he said, to get to that operation, you have to be a hyper aggressive male. And then to go from there to the United States, you had to be a hyper aggressive male. And these people get here, and their concern seems to be about the power, building the walls, making sure that their career survives everything else. And the problem they're having is people like this who are very tribal versus the rest of the world, it seems. So I thought that I wanted to, ask you to opine on that, but also give your thoughts now on how you see this caste system emerging in the US. Is it good? Obviously it's not good, but what are your thoughts on these cases, and where should we, what should we be paying particular attention to, and what should we be learning from all this?
So, Kevin, let me respond to your first comment first. I used to work for an American company following their Indian portfolio. In my position as an analyst for that company, I could call up the CEO of any company in North America, and he would pick up my call. But the problem with following the Indian portfolio was that if I called up a company in India, the receptionist would ask me my designation, and then she would say that I could not talk with the CEO because my designation was not appropriate for the CEO in the Indian company. And then she would connect me only with the person with a similar designation in their company. So that's, again, telling you about the pecking system that exists in that country. Now, Kevin, over the last 13 years, I have spent a lot of time in Philadelphia and in San Francisco. I have existed in the ecosystem of IT people in both the cities. And in every condo building that I have lived in, there are, of course, a lot of Indians, and they group themselves not only based on their castes, but based on the language they speak, and I'm talking about Indians here, the religion they have, the region they come from. So you see all these subgroups within these so-called educated Indians. So responding to your third comment there, by bringing in all these immigrants, you have brought in the cultural problems of these people. Now, I hear from Americans all the time that they have no problems with legal immigrants. The problem is that you are still bringing in a massive cultural problem by bringing so many people in bulk who are allowed to ghettoize. They are allowed to ghettoize because you are bringing in so many people that they can always find a person of their own kind and never try to assimilate in the American society. And the end result is that you now, as you mentioned, a legal process going on in which you want to create laws against the caste discrimination, which is an admission by absolutely everyone that the caste system is now here in the US and you have brought in the problems of India. The question is, why did you bring all those problems to the US?
Yeah, and we really didn't need to. The H-1B, and I'd like to get your thoughts on another thing before we delve into that, because to me, there's this line of demarcation, and it's pre-1990 and post-1990. When I was a kid growing up in the 60s and 70s, if there was an Indian or a Filipino or a doctor from Hong Kong working in my small rural community, they were the best. There was one doctor in particular who had diagnosed very early on a spinal column issue with one of my sister's classmates. And all the American doctors were like, we would have never caught that. That's amazing. And so there was, if you were here, it's almost as if, wow, you were the best of the best. And then after the Immigration Reform Act of 1990, when we saw the H-1B visa created, and it just became this pipeline of, because over 73% of people that get H-1B visas every year come from one country, India, and it's been recognized as a pipeline of cheap labor that's basically indentured labor for their corporate masters. So that's why they're here. I mean, that's the why, but as you're saying, there's some serious ramifications to all this, other than the actual displacement of Americans who probably had to train them to do their jobs.
Yeah, so these Indians might be earning among the highest salary or on average basis as a community, but the problem is that they are still not Western in their way of thinking. They bring in their caste system, their bigotry into the US. And as a result, you have these ghettoized, rich, educated Indians in North America today.
Yeah, and there's probably, in your opinion, because as I look at things, I don't see, where unless the citizenry kind of rise up and demand that immigration be curbed like we did in 1924, because what most Americans don't fully understand is between 1924 and 1965, we really had zero net immigration into the US. We built the middle class. My mother came in 1952 during that period, and everyone assimilated very well. It was restrictive and well regulated. But when you would mention the 1.4 billion contacts and connections, that's 1.4 billion people in India. And I was reading something recently where they're predicting by 2030, there could be 500 million Indians that don't have access to water. So I don't see any curve coming to what's going to lower immigration to the US.
Well, I don't know where you get that figure from. Most Indians don't have access to water, Kevin. It was only when I arrived in the West that I realized that you could get water 24 hours in the tap. Even in the best and most urbanized, richest part of India, you get water for a couple of hours every day. That's the limit of water in the taps. A very, very large proportion of the country, easily much more than 500 million people, have zero access to tap water. They have to go to the sewage kind of canals to get some water. So yes, the country is still savage, is still barbaric, and there will be huge pressures on the Western system because anyone who understands the world even vaguely, is trying to leave India and move to the US. There's a massive amount of illegal refugees now entering the US from the Mexican border. And this will continue to increase as time goes by because just the fact that 1 out of 5 or 1 out of 6 people on the planet is an Indian today.
Interesting. I'd like to get your thoughts. I had read where some 4.5 million people enter the workforce each year in India. Then I've also seen where it's 12 million. I'm not sure the exact number. And there's a lot of talk, and it scares me when I hear bureaucrats in Washington, D.C. talking about, hey, we're going to limit our dependence on China and move the manufacturing like Fox Pro. They're going to move operations to India. And I'm going, oh my God, haven't we learned anything from COVID? What are your thoughts on this? I mean, can you industrialize India? Can you build a middle class in India? I mean, from what you just told me, probably not.
Kevin, I have been writing about India for the last 25 years, and you can go back to my articles, you can go back to my speeches 10, 15 years back, which are on YouTube, in which I tell people not to compare India with China. This is a stupid comparison. They are incomparable countries. China is a first world country from the perception of what India is like. And China continues to improve, whereas India continues to degrade. So there is absolutely no connection with between the two countries. India today has among the most polluted countries on the planet. If you look at the list of all the polluted countries on the planet, most of them are Indian. A couple of them are in the Middle East, but that is because there's a lot of sand in the air in some of the Middle Eastern cities. And I go to China quite often, Kevin. Chinese environment has improved drastically by every passing year. Now,
oh, really?
China,
so it's not like when we used to go there 10 years ago, if you were wearing a white shirt in Shanghai, it would be like yellow by the end of the day.
Well, it might, there's still pollution in Shanghai, and there's still pollution in a lot of places in China. But compared to what it used to be, things have improved very drastically in China. Chinese are becoming civilized. China, at least industrialized. India managed to pollute itself and destroy its environment without even starting to industrialize. There's no industrialization in India. Virtually everything usable that comes to that country comes from China. If you go and buy a plastic toy, it is made in China. So now, if you think that manufacturing will ever move to India, this is concocted by people who have no concept of reality. I have been advising Western countries on investing in India, to most of who I say don't bother, because most of them eventually end up losing all the money they invest in that country. But while I say to most people don't bother, to a couple of them, because of special situations, I advise on investing in India. But you always have to remember that Indians are extremely uneducated, extremely unskilled, and it is primarily a savage and barbaric society where there's no rule of law, and the institutions have been completely hollowed out. It's a very venal set of people who run that country.
While we're talking about the people that run the country, what are your thoughts on Modi and the cabal around him?
Well, I mean, again, Modi claims that he was a tea seller at a railway station before he started his political career, and that tells you that he actually has no experience of life in India. Now, I have nothing against tea sellers, Kevin, but it gives you a certain kind of qualification and understanding about the country. Modi, for example, look for any interviews that Modi has given, and you will find none. Modi does not give interviews to journalists. He does not even address any audience and responds to questions of anyone. He always gives a pre-prepared monologue to people. So that tells you about his understanding. He is there because his party started this anti-Muslim propaganda, and I have nothing good to say about Muslims, Kevin, but because they are two sides of the same coin, really. And that is very important to remember. These are the lower caste, upper caste, Muslims, Hindus, they are all a part of the same coin. None of them is any special there. And Modi is using Hindu fanaticism to increase his control over the country. And that is leading the country to exactly the same path that Pakistan started going about 20 years back.
Interesting. And there just doesn't seem to be any way to pull out, because obviously he's someone who isn't an experienced bureaucrat. He's not familiar with government per se. He just landed in that position, and he leads as a demagogue would.
Absolutely. There's no way out of that situation. And that is why every Indian who can leave the country leaves the country. The country is falling apart. And I'm saying this, Kevin, because despite the fact that if you go on CNN or if you go to the German ambassador, or if you go to I'm not talking about recent talks by Secretary of Commerce, the USA, they are extraordinarily euphoric about India. They see India as the place that will deliver growth to the world. And that tells me about two things. Either these people are completely stupid, or they are trying to position India for something against China. Now, remember, Kevin, that while India and Hinduism might look cute and all acceptable from the Western perspective, they are not your friends, because underpinning everything to do with India is savagery and barbarism and irrationality and magical thinking. It does not, there's no synchronization between the two cultures. Whereas East Asians, and that includes China, they instinctively want to copy Western ways, and Chinese have copied Western ways. If you go to Paris or London, you will see a lot of Chinese, because they want to copy and paste the behavioral patterns of Europeans. Now, maybe that is wrong, but at least they're trying to understand and copy what they see as classy.
Right.
Whereas
the
Indians
Japanese
don't do those
kind of
things.
put that on steroids, right? I mean,
That's where it all started. Japanese started it, Hong Kong people started it, Singaporeans then followed, South Koreans followed, and now Chinese are going on steroids with the same thing. Chinese, East Asia, whatever it is today, is a product of the good values that they have accepted, adapted, and adopted for their own purposes. South Asians, they are hedonistic. They don't have a moral underpinning fabric, which means that they really don't, they seem to be cute in the short term, but they contribute nothing to your culture.
Interesting. So what would you say are the three, for you personally, the three most important aspects or guides of what a Western civilization? What do you think are the most important aspects of civilization that can't necessarily be copied and could be in danger with these mass migrations?
Well, it's not could be in danger. The Western society has decided to do harakiri by bringing in a massive amount of people from the third world, and this trend cannot be reversed. The problem is that people from the third world today have more children in many parts of the Western world than the people who are ethnically European have. So this trend is irreversible now for most of the Western world, unfortunately. What are the 3 points, great things about the Western world? I wish I could, really define those 3 things in Kevin. It is a very subliminal thing. Western society is the only civilization that ever emerged out of the animal kingdom. And that made human beings distinct from animals. There are so many things, and I don't, many people say Christianity was destructive to the Western society. Maybe Christianity was destructive, maybe it contributed massively to providing a moral fabric to the Western society. The concept of reason that emerged from Greco-Roman systems, what we call barbarians from the Germanic tribes who had the concept of honor, and these were warriors. And there's a lot of value in being warriors. There's honor, there's integrity, there's a community spirit in being warriors. So there's a lot of qualities that just came together in the West over a period of 2 millennia and made the West what it is today. Now, I'm not talking about the economy here. You could be actually poor, but I'm talking about the intellectual, spiritual, the psychological, the emotional growth that started happening in Europe, which led to economic progress, and most importantly, which led to intellectual progress, which brought in philosophy. They brought in a moral structure of conduct. So this is interesting. Just to conclude, Kevin, I can be sitting with a leftist American, and I'm as right-wing as you can think of, a person can be, and I can have a decent conversation with him. He can disagree with we can completely disagree with each other, but we can still end up shaking hands, or at least stop talking with each other. If I have a similar conversation, even with a right-wing Indian, and even if we agree on most points, the problem is that he might start shouting at me for the minor points of disagreement. And this is so there's this subliminal, the foundations are so well set over those 2 millennia that created the European civilization.
Right. It's interesting. You've triggered so many thoughts in my mind. One, right, we're saying I'm having trouble boiling it down. And this one phrase that comes from the Victorian times came to me. And it was like what the English would say to each other: be British. What does that mean? Well, it's obviously a lot of things. And, one's deportment, one's, so many things. And then also, when we look at just recently, there was a post on social media, and it was some Indian journalist, and he was saying how, oh my God, look at all these tech companies in the US, and they're, immigrants were part of some of them. And there's this glomming onto of what I see among many H-1B holders and people that are pushing the H-1B visa program and bringing in more people from India. It's like, oh my God, they know technology, And to me, it's almost like, wait a minute. It's like someone, like they're running a marathon, and this guy jumps in on the last 2 miles of it, and he crosses the finish line. He goes, hey, I've just run a marathon. It's like, wait a minute, US technology companies, they go back, their roots go back to the 1900s, the innovation, the productivity that was going on in the 20s and the 30s that led to the vacuum tubes. And then later, after World War II, the transistors, and then the semiconductors. This was a whole infrastructure that was built out. And for people now to take credit for, building apps and enhancing the value of a service like Google and things, I'm just gobsmacked by. And it doesn't bode well, because I'd like to get your thoughts on another conversation I had with the director of a technology manufacturing company. And I expected to get a lot of pushback from him, because I kind of cornered him at breakfast to talk about the H-1B visa program. And he goes, Kev, I agree with you. And I'm like, really? And he goes, yeah, look, like in Bangalore, we have a group over there. And if I tell them exactly what to do, they're going to do it really, really well. But if I go to them with a problem to solve, crickets. But here, I tell someone from the rest of the world, hey, this is the problem. A couple of weeks later, they'll come back and, hey, let's spitball this against the wall and try to solve this. So what he said was, we're taking a hit on innovation. For 20 years, you've been following this efficiency model, maximize profits, lower costs, wring everything out. But innovation's been hurt, and also ultimately productivity, things having to be done over again. So that I'd like to get your thoughts on those, on what I just said, and again, the implications, and ultimately, does that lead you to say, look, we just simply need to put an end to this kind of migration?
So two things, Kevin. As I told you that I have advised companies on India in the past, and what I consistently see is that big corporations cannot discuss what is considered politically incorrect. So if someone in their boardroom speaks up and says, hey, this is the problem you are bringing into our corporation by bringing in certain kind of people, what would happen to that person, Kevin? He would be fired right away. He would be fired right away. So what you are left with are politically correct people who do not want to challenge this continual immigration of people from the third world. And very rarely they bring me on board because someone with some conscience wants me to speak up, do the dirty laundry that they don't want to do. And I'm happy to do that for, of course, a good consulting fee. But this is a problem that, you have to remember how many of those, planes that fell off the sky fell because the software was not made properly.
The Boeing 737 MAX, they outsourced that to HCL, a Indian consulting firm. It was insane.
Now, who has the courage to say publicly that it was because they offloaded the work to India? Because that person does not want to look racist by speaking up what are just facts, nothing else. So as I said, I have existed in the ecosystem of IT companies for the last 13 years. And what I am constantly told by people after a couple of beers is that the quality of software is sometimes so bad that they have to rewrite it after a couple of years. But the current managers don't care because they would have moved on to something else by the time the problems that the software that they are getting made at cheap cost from India, those problems start to surface. So, this is a combination of political correctness, short-termism, and, just this feel-good factor around corporations. Now, you talked about Indians in positions in the IT industry. Now, remember, most of the higher level Indians in big corporations are administrators. They are not innovators. They are not there because they innovate, but they are there because they follow what they are told to follow. A lot of Indians in the Bay Area and in other IT sectors are routine desktop, low level software programmers, a lot of who will be replaced by artificial intelligence. So that is the situation, and I have seen so many CVs and that are fake. Everyone creates fake CVs for H-1B visas. This is a trend. There are companies that help you create, and this is an open secret. Everyone knows about it. Everyone talks about it, but somehow I don't even know why the government of the United States does nothing about it.
No, it's rampant. I was speaking with someone who did tech recruiting for the state of California, and she said, I've seen the same resume for 3 different people this week already. And that's normal. And I was taken through a federal government agency, and the person taking me through said, don't keep your cell phone in your pocket, just walk through with me. And we walked through, and in this one shop, it was all Indians. It was all Indians, not mostly, all Indians. And they're on the phone, and I go, what are they all goofing off? He says, no, they're on the phone with tech support back in India because their code writing skills are so bad. They're letting those guys take over their machines and write their code for them. That's what we're faced with. It's a race to the bottom now, and it's frustrating for me. And I'd love to get your advice on someone who is trying to create a resurgence in among U.S. tech workers to get them back and get them gainfully employed again. But it's very difficult in this environment. All the recruiters seem to be from India. And there seems to be this prioritization of foreigners over Americans. So if you were to give a guy like me some advice, our Institute for Sound Public Policy, on strategies to follow, do you have anything that you could impart on us?
So Kevin, I'm currently in Tokyo. I am, I would like to tell you to look at what East Asia has done. East Asia is doing extremely well. Japan is always demeaned by the mainstream media. Japan is one of the best countries on the planet. Look at how massively growth is happening in China. Look at Taiwan and South Korea. They don't have, they manage to benefit from their own people. They have created mostly a homogeneous society. 99% of Japanese is ethnically Japanese, and 1% left over is probably South Korean and Chinese, who mix in very quickly with what they have. So, and at any point of time, they don't really bring in more than a handful of people into their countries. So, understand them that there is a value in staying homogeneous, because you don't really have the cultural conflicts that erupt if you have a heterogeneous society. Why should you have to bring people from outside? And if you bring in people from outside, make sure, as Singapore and Hong Kong does, that they leave the country when the work is over. Do not give them long-term visas, do not give them your passport, and do not give them voting rights for many, many generations. Now, from what I have heard, in Canada, you can actually vote in local election, even if you're not a citizen of Canada. So we are just going absolutely crazy and stupid in the Western world today.
Yeah,
compassion has metastasized into a kind of cancer. Compassion and tolerance have just gone absolutely wild in the Western world today.
Yeah, perhaps it's this overarching decadence. Maybe things just got a little too easy for us, or, also too, there's a grift. For instance, I lambasted my local city council a couple of weeks ago on what they want to do is give $250,000 of federal dollars to a volunteer agency that already gets $114 million of federal dollars every year to help them resettle more refugees from all over the world in this small city. And they look upon it as they're honored to do it. And I just gave them hell. But I'm now a racist, a xenophobe, a nationalist. And, this is the tragedy. I am a firm believer that ultimately will always be bad times, but if there's social cohesion and you can trust the person next to you and to your left and to your right, you're going to fare much better. And that seems to be what you're saying to me.
Yes, absolutely, Kevin. It's not just about trust. It's similarity of values. It's a fact that you then don't have what we just talked about, the caste system. You don't have the new problems like female infanticide or the age of consent. All these problems were not originally European problems, and they have increasingly become European problems because you have brought in cultures that whose problems reflect in these creation of new laws, which is an admission by absolutely everyone that these cultures don't actually mix. And all you are doing is dealing with the symptoms. You cannot really correct the underlying cultural problems, because now these people, because you are importing them in large numbers, can't even assimilate. They live in their own ghettos. A lot of them don't even learn English. And if they learn English, they speak with the accent of their local ghetto. So you are really destroying the Western world by not paying attention to it. But the problem is that in a democratic system, the kind of demagoguery that has started in the Western world, all these mushy talk, all these romantic conversations make a lot more impact on a voter than to get votes than really doing something concrete. Whereas in homogeneous societies in East Asia, they have to stick to creating value for the society, otherwise they get thrown out very quickly.
Wow, and I think that's probably a great note to wind things down on, Jayant. Now I'm going to post a link to your website with this video, but people can find you simply by going to jayantbhandari.com.
That's correct, yeah. And I post everything that I write on my website.
And then, of course, there's Twitter. Are you on any other social media platforms other than Twitter?
Yes, I'm on LinkedIn and I'm on Facebook. You can search my name and see my page there.
Fantastic. Well, I'm really hoping, Jayant, that I can make it to the next Capitalism and Morality Conference. Everyone I know who went, I'm really bummed out. I was unjabbed and couldn't get across the border. But I definitely want to attend next year. And thank you so much for, the courage of your convictions. And I'm hoping when people watch this video, they'll be inspired to do at least one brave act that day in terms of pushing back against this.
Well, Kevin, I'm a product of the Western society. They gave me what I am today. So I want to contribute back by giving my views on what I think they should correct course on. And thanks for having me on.
Thank you.